Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're hawking on a journey to really demystify the art and science of qualitative research. We're going to follow a researcher's path, all the way from a single burning question to a conclusion that's not just insightful, but truly trustworthy. You really got to think about it. Numbers and stats, they're fantastic at telling us what is happening. But to get at the human elements, the real motivations, the decision-making, the culture, we have to dig deeper. So while numbers tell us the what, qualitative research is the tool we use to discover the why. Okay, let's dive right in. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with that quest for why, then get into how to actually gather and make sense of the stories, see how they fit with what we already know, and finally, make sure the results are rock solid and trustworthy.
So, our journey begins with the most fundamental tool for this quest, really understanding what qualitative research is. And it's so much more than just chatting with people. It's a structured way to get a handle on the human experience.
This brings us to a really cool idea, micro-foundations. So instead of just looking at a company's big picture strategy, qualitative research uses things like interviews and text to understand the attitudes and the choices of the very people who shaped that strategy. It's all about getting the inside story on how decisions are made.
All right, the first major step in this whole journey is gathering stories. And you do that by talking to key informants. Now, these are the heavy hitters, influential decision makers, top executives, the people with that exclusive information you just can't find in a public report. And boom, here we hit our first major hurdle. Getting access is, frankly, one of the biggest challenges. These people are busy, they're powerful, and they're almost always protected by gatekeepers like executive assistants. I mean, the source material mentions one researcher who spent nearly 2 years just making calls and setting up meetings to interview only 2 executives. Wow.
So how do you break through? Well, the source material points to some really clever strategies. You can frame your interview not as something you need, but as a way to help them solve a problem in their industry. Leveraging networks, like a university alumni database, that's a classic move. Sometimes you can even just bypass the gatekeeper with a really well-crafted email. But here's a truly smart approach. Engage that gatekeeper. Make that executive assistant your ally. If you can win them over, they can become your biggest advocate.
This quote from some very seasoned researchers is so revealing. It gets at a crucial psychological insight about interviewing powerful people. See, it's not just about what you ask, it's about the credibility you bring to the table.
And that's the bottom line. Doing your homework isn't just about asking smarter questions, it's about earning respect. When you know the jargon, the history, the context, it signals that you're serious. And that level of prep is what helps you build the kind of rapport you need to get truly insightful answers.
Okay, you did it. You're in the room. But now what? The power imbalance usually favors the person you're interviewing. They're professional communicators, and they might try to steer the conversation, leading you away from what you actually want to learn. There's even a risk of something called hostage syndrome, where the researcher gets so intimidated they just nod along and accept whatever the informant says.
To counter this, a researcher can use a whole mix of tactics. On the formal side, getting an endorsement from a respected organization can really lend you credibility. Informally, just being familiar with their world, how they dress, their daily rituals, can help bridge that gap. Then, once you've built that rapport, you have to be bold enough to ask the tough questions. And you can even use subtle nonverbal cues, like a raised eyebrow, to signal, hey, I need a little more on that, without saying a word.
Okay, so after dozens of interviews, our researcher is now sitting on mountains of text. The challenge now becomes finding meaningful patterns in all of it, and that's where technology can be a huge help. CATA software is a pretty powerful tool. It automates this whole process by scanning text and counting words to measure different concepts. But, and this is a big but, it's not a magic bullet. It's prone to some very specific kinds of errors because, well, computers don't always get human context. So first up, we have something called transient error. This happens when the language in documents changes over time. The big question is that a real shift in, say, company strategy, or is it just random noise? The key here is to shorten the time between your data points. For example, looking at quarterly reports instead of annual ones gives you a much clearer picture of whether a change is a real trend or just a temporary blip. And this is such a brilliant illustration of the next challenge, specific factor error. This is all about context. The software might be told to look for the word new to measure innovation, but it's also going to count New York or new regulations, which have zero to do with it. The solution is to have a human in the loop, a researcher who keeps refining the software's dictionary, swapping single words for more specific phrases, like new product.
Now, to avoid reinventing the wheel and make sure they're using the best techniques out there, our researcher turns to methodological literature reviews. You can think of these as masterclasses from the experts who have already walked this same path.
These reviews are just incredibly valuable. They're essentially the how-to guides of the research world. They help researchers get better at what they do, they uphold scientific standards by calling out sketchy practices, and they point the way forward by showing us what we still don't know. They're absolutely vital for keeping the whole field honest and moving forward.
At this point, our researcher starts to realize that those rich, detailed stories from interviews might not be enough on their own. Sometimes, to really get the full picture, you need to combine that qualitative depth with the broad-scale power of quantitative data.
And this is the core idea of mixed methods. It's not about doing two separate studies. It's about smart, strategic integration. For example, you could use quantitative data to spot statistical outliers, like the highest and lowest performing companies, and then use qualitative interviews to build a rich story that explains why they're so different. It's a powerful way to let each method cover the other's blind spots.
And here we are at the final and most critical stage of the whole journey. A study can have the most fascinating findings in the world, but if other researchers can't understand how you got there, it's not truly scientific. The goal is to make sure your work isn't just interesting, but that it's credible and completely trustworthy.
To make your research trustworthy, you have to break trust down into real, concrete actions. This checklist here outlines 12 specific criteria, and it covers everything from your initial design and sampling choices to how you analyze the data, and even if you're willing to share your raw materials. Following this basically ensures your work isn't some mysterious black box.
Now, this level of transparency is exactly what makes replication possible, and that's the gold standard of scientific rigor. The core question is always, can someone else follow your steps and find a similar result? Well, in qualitative research, this can actually be done in 3 different ways.
And these 3 types really build on each other. First, you have exact replication, which is just a direct copy to check for errors. Simple enough. Then there's empirical replication, where you use the same methods but on a new group of people to see how widely the findings apply. And finally, conceptual replication tests the core theory itself using a totally different method to see if the idea holds up.
And really, when you get down to it, this entire journey, from that first really tough interview to the final, detailed report, it's all about being able to confidently answer this one crucial question. Because in the quest to understand why, trust is absolutely everything.